5 o'clock in the morning, a kitchen in a pit village in County Durham. 1953, the range warming up, the dripping jar open on the counter, the bread already cut, the eggs waiting. He would be underground by 6. She knew exactly what that required, and she had been making it since the week they married. Breakfast number 18 was the pre-shift drink of the industrial north for 50 years, and has been replaced by a product that costs £5 a carton and does half the job. Breakfast number 7 sustained Lancashire textile workers for 100 years, before jam became cheap enough to end it. And breakfast number 1 has no recipe. It was never a recipe, it was knowledge. And knowledge does not survive when nobody passes it on. These were not poor breakfast. They were built for people about to do something serious with their bodies. Subscribe, because some of these you will remember, and some of them will change how you think about breakfast entirely. Let us count them down. Breakfast, 25. Bread and dripping before avocado toast, before granola, before anyone decided breakfast needed to be an event. There was bread and dripping, and it was better than all of it. Thick slices of bread spread with beef dripping saved from Sunday's roast. The white rendered fat layered over the dark meat jelly at the bottom of the ceramic pot. That jelly was the prize. Children scraped the toast across the pot, hoping to catch a smear of the intensely savory sediment beneath the pale fat. A pinch of salt, that was all it needed. Ministry of Food wartime recipe cards listed dripping as a primary breakfast spread throughout the 1940s. Government nutritionists endorsed it. The nation ate it. Recent research at King's College London has reversed 60 years of dietary advice. The saturated animal fats that built working-class Britain are now understood to be more stable and less inflammatory than the seed oils that replaced them. The margarine companies funded the campaign that ended dripping on the breakfast table. The science has since admitted they were wrong. She kept the jar. She was right to. Breakfast, 24. Porridge with salt, not sweet porridge. Not porridge with honey and blueberries and a swirl of almond butter. Porridge with salt, the Scottish way, the way that actually worked. Oats simmered slowly in water with a pinch of salt. No sugar, no fruit, no additions. The salt enhanced the natural nuttiness of the grain, and the result was something completely different from the sweetened version most people know today. A bag of rolled oats cost a few pence in 1950 and made enough porridge for a week. Working men across the north and Scotland ate it before shifts that started at 5 in the morning and ran until noon without a break, kept them full for 6 hours. No blood sugar crash, no mid-morning collapse. Just steady, slow-release energy from grain that had not been processed into something it was never meant to be. Thick and pale in the bowl, steam rising, the salt lifting the grain into something nutty and warm, heavy in the stomach in the right way. The cereal industry did not replace salted porridge because it was inferior. They replaced it because it was impossible to charge a premium for something that cost a penny a bowl. Breakfast, 23. Fried bread, a thick slice of white bread fried in the leftover bacon fat until golden and crisp on both sides. The breakfast nobody makes anymore, and the one everyone still thinks about. No extra cost. The fat was already in the pan, already hot, already flavored with everything that had been cooked before it. The outside went golden and shatteringly crisp, while the inside stayed soft and yielding, saturated with the flavor of the bacon it had shared a pan with. You could hear it from the other room. That specific sizzle that meant something good was happening. Working men across Britain ate fried bread before dawn through the 1950s and 60s. Pit canteens, factory canteens, transport cafes. It appeared alongside everything else on the plate and was considered unremarkable. The health warnings of the 1980s ended it in most homes. Recent nutritional research has since confirmed that those warnings were based on flawed methodology. We buy sourdough at £3.50 a loaf and toast it under a grill. She fried yesterday's bread in the bacon fat and produce something no artisan bakery has ever improved upon. Breakfast, 22. Kippers. The smell hits you before you reach the kitchen. Nobody who grew up in a house where kippers were made on a Friday morning has ever forgotten it. Nobody ever will. A kipper cost about 4 pence in 1955 and provided enough protein and fat to sustain a working man through a full morning shift. Cooked by placing in a jug of boiling water for 5 minutes. No pan, no fat, no skill beyond boiling a kettle. The Women's Institute cookery guides from 1952 listed kippers as the most nutritionally complete and economical breakfast protein available to the British working household, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D and protein, the deep amber color of the smoked skin, the flaking flesh underneath, pale and tender, the intense savory richness of the first bite. Kippers appear on hotel breakfast menus today at £9 a portion and are considered a luxury. She ate one every Friday morning for 4p and thought nothing of it. The herring fishery was not destroyed by declining demand. It was destroyed by industrial overfishing. The kipper did not disappear because people stopped wanting it. The sea was simply emptied. Breakfast, 21. Black pudding and fried egg. The breakfast that separated the serious eaters from everyone else Black pudding sliced thick, fried in dripping until the casing split and the interior went soft and dark. An egg cracked into the same pan, the white crisping at the edges in the rendered fat. Black pudding cost about 3p a slice in 1955 and was sold by butchers across the north as a weekday staple. High in iron, protein, and fat, exactly what a body needed before hours of physical labor. Bury in Greater Manchester was the black pudding capital of Britain. The market stall at Bury Market has sold it since the 1800s and still does. The oral histories from Lancashire Textile Mill records describe black pudding as the universal pre-shift breakfast in factory towns across the north through the 1950s. The casing splitting in the pan with a soft pop, the dark interior revealed, the egg white crisping alongside, the smell of blood and spice and hot iron. Black pudding appears on gastropub menus today as a starter at £8 a portion. It was breakfast for a factory worker in Bury for 3p. The elevation has not improved it. Breakfast, 20. Oatmeal, gruel. Before porridge became fashionable again, before overnight oats appeared in mason jars on social media, gruel fed the British working class through its hardest centuries. Oatmeal simmered in water until completely broken down into a thin, smooth, pale liquid, thinner than porridge, more easily digested, cheaper per portion than almost anything else a household could produce. A farthing a bowl in the 1800s, the cheapest hot food in Britain, sweetened with a spoonful of black treacle when available, the treacle providing iron and the oats providing slow-release carbohydrate. Poor Law Commission dietary records from 1836 document gruel as the primary breakfast of the labouring poor across England and Wales. The connotations of poverty drove it from respectable tables by the 1920s. The shame of what it represented ended it before the nutritional science could defend it. The beta-glucan in oats reduces cholesterol, regulates blood sugar, and feeds gut bacteria. The food dismissed as pauper fare is now sold as a wellness product at £4 a sachet. The oat did not change, only the packaging did, and the price. Breakfast 19, deviled kidneys on toast. The Victorians ate this for breakfast and thought nothing of it. By the 1970s, it had become exotic. By the 1990s, it had almost entirely disappeared. Lamb's kidneys split, cored, and fried in butter with a splash of Worcestershire sauce, a pinch of cayenne, and a squeeze of lemon, served on hot buttered toast. The whole thing done in 4 minutes. Kidneys cost 6p a pair in 1955 because nobody else wanted them. High in iron, B vitamins, and protein, among the most nutritionally dense ingredients available at minimal cost. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management from 1861 listed deviled kidneys as an essential breakfast dish for any well-run household. Not a special occasion dish, a weekday breakfast. The Worcestershire sauce reducing in the pan with a sharp, savory smell. The cayenne catching slightly at the back of the throat, piled onto hot buttered toast, the juices soaking in immediately. Lamb's kidneys cost £1.50 for 4 at most butchers today. The most nutritionally dense breakfast on this list is also one of the cheapest. It was abandoned for cultural reasons, not practical ones. That was an expensive decision dressed up as a preference. Breakfast 18, bacon hock broth. It sounds like dinner. It was breakfast. Across the industrial north through the first half of the 20th century, a mug of hot bacon hock broth before a 6-hour shift was as standard as a cup of tea. The liquor from a simmered bacon hock, salty, intensely savory, rich with collagen and fat, drunk hot from a mug before the men left. Cost, nothing extra. The hock had already been bought for the week's meals. The broth was the byproduct of cooking it. Salted, a pinch of white pepper, nothing more needed. The flavor of the broth was the meal. High in collagen, electrolytes, and fat. Exactly what a working body needed before hours of physical labor in cold conditions. Museum of English Rural Life Oral Histories describe bacon hock broth as the standard pre-shift drink in pit villages and mill towns across the north through the 1940s. Dark golden and slightly cloudy in the mug, the smell of salt and smoked pork rising with the steam, warming from the first sip through to somewhere behind the sternum. Bone broth sells for £5 a carton today and is marketed as a wellness product. She made the same thing as a byproduct of cooking the week's meat. Breakfast 17, fried leftover potatoes, last night's potatoes, this morning's breakfast. A cast iron pan, a knob of dripping, and 10 minutes. Cold boiled or roasted potatoes from the night before, sliced or roughly broken and fried in dripping until golden and crisp on the outside, soft inside, seasoned with salt, eaten alongside a fried egg or simply on their own with a shake of pepper. Cost, nothing. The potatoes had already been bought and cooked. The dripping was a byproduct of the week's cooking. The breakfast was free. The Women's Institute wartime cookery guides from 1942 listed leftover potato cookery as an essential daily skill for managing household food waste. Not a tip, an essential. The potatoes hitting the hot dripping with a sharp sizzle, the outside going golden and slightly blistered, the inside soft and warm, the smell of potato caramelizing at the edges where it touched the pan. We throw away leftover potatoes without a second thought and buy frozen hash browns at £2 a bag. She fried hers in dripping and produced something better than anything in the freezer aisle. The best breakfast ingredients were always the ones already in the kitchen from the night before. Here is what the nutrition science confirms 60 years after the fact. A 1978 study by the Medical Research Council found that working men engaged in heavy physical labor required between 3,500 and 4,500 calories a day to maintain body weight and muscle mass. The breakfasts on this list delivered between 500 and 800 calories each, primarily from fat and protein. Fat and protein digest slowly. They sustain energy for 3 to 4 hours without a blood sugar spike or crash. The cereal and toast breakfast that replaced them delivers primarily fast-acting carbohydrate, energy for 60 to 90 minutes. Then the crash. Working men in the coal fields and the foundries knew nothing about glycemic index. They knew they needed to be standing at 2 in the afternoon. The dripping and the kipper and the black pudding kept them standing. The cornflakes did not. Breakfast 16. Herrings in oatmeal, a Scottish breakfast that fed fishing communities from Wick to Arbroath for 200 years. Still the best thing you can do with a fresh herring and a handful of oatmeal. Fresh herring fillets rolled in coarse oatmeal and fried in butter until the crust was golden and the fish cooked through, the oatmeal absorbing the butter and providing a crisp exterior that contrasted with the rich, oily flesh inside. Herring was the cheapest protein available in coastal Britain, twopence each in 1955. The Scottish Women's Rural Institute guides from 1949 listed herrings in oatmeal as the definitive Scottish working breakfast. Quick, cheap, and sustaining, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, and protein. One of the most nutritionally complete breakfasts available at minimal cost. The oatmeal crust golden and slightly sandy in texture. The herring flesh underneath pale and rich and yielding. Butter running from the crust. The smell of the sea and hot fat and toasted grain. Herring is now a specialist product. She bought them fresh from the fishmonger for twopence and fried them before the men left for the boats. The North Sea was not fished out by appetite, it was fished out by industry. The breakfast disappeared because the fish did. Breakfast 15. Toast and beef extract. A thin scrape of Bovril on hot buttered toast, or Marmite if that was what the cupboard held. Either way, the combination produced something that tasted far more substantial than its ingredients suggested. Hot toast spread first with butter, then with a thin scrape of beef or yeast extract. The fat and the concentrated umami creating something deeply satisfying at almost zero cost. A jar of Bovril cost about 1 shilling in 1952 and lasted weeks with careful use. District nurses in the 1950s recommended Bovril toast to anemic patients, elderly people living alone, and anyone recovering from illness. The B12 content was exceptional. The Ministry of Food Nutritional Guides from 1944 listed Bovril as an essential store cupboard item for nutritional support during rationing. The dark scrape of extract on the hot butter, melting slightly into it. The intensely savory smell rising with the steam. The first bite hitting the back of the tongue with something rich and concentrated. We buy vitamin B supplements at £15 a bottle and ignore the jar of Marmite at the back of the cupboard. She got her B vitamins from a scrape of extract on toast that cost a farthing. Breakfast 14. Oatcakes with cheese, not the thin, crispy kind from a packet. The thick, soft, griddle-cooked oatcakes of Staffordshire that ate more like bread than biscuit and were taken to work wrapped in a cloth, made from oatmeal, flour, water, and a little yeast, cooked on a griddle until soft and slightly chewy, eaten warm with a slice of cheese melted on top, or folded around bacon for the men heading to the pottery kilns. A penny for 2 oatcakes in 1955, cheaper and more sustaining than bread, high in fiber and slow-release carbohydrate. Staffordshire oatcakes sustained pottery workers, miners, and factory hands through long morning shifts for a century. Oatcake shops in Stoke-on-Trent still sell them through hatches in the wall at 5 in the morning. The Staffordshire Oral History Archive documents oatcake consumption as near universal in the potteries workforce from the 1850s through to the 1970s. Soft and slightly spongy from the griddle, the cheese melting into the surface, dense and filling and smelling of toasted grain and warm dairy. Most of Britain has never heard of them. The potteries workforce ate them every morning for 100 years. The rest of the country never knew what it was missing. Breakfast 13. Tripe and onions. This one will lose some of you. Stay with it, because tripe and onions for breakfast in a Lancashire mill town in 1950 was not poverty food. It was preference. Bleached and dressed ox stomachs simmered in milk with onions until tender, served hot in a bowl with bread to dip, the smell mild and milky rather than the assault most people imagine, the texture tender and yielding, almost gelatinous, offering no resistance. Tripe was 3p a pound in 1955 because nobody outside the north wanted it. High in protein, collagen, and minerals, nutritionally valuable in a way its price never reflected. Tripe shops operated in every major northern town through the first half of the 20th century, open from early morning, serving workers before 6 o'clock shifts. The Bolton Oral History Project from 2004 describes tripe shops as essential community institutions in every working-class district of the town. The post-war generation's rejection of offal ended tripe as a breakfast food by the 1970s. The smell was too strong, the texture too challenging for people who had not grown up eating it. They were wrong. The people who grew up eating it knew something. The people who rejected it never learned. Breakfast. 12. Dripping toast with fried egg. The combination that appeared on the table before he left for work without anyone saying it was special. It was just what breakfast was. Hot toast spread with beef dripping. An egg fried in the same pan until the white was set and the yolk still running. Served together on one plate. The dripping was free, saved from the week's cooking. The egg cost 3p in 1955. The whole breakfast cost pennies and provided sustained fat, protein, and carbohydrate in the proportions a working body needed. The Mass Observation Project from 1943 documented working men's morning meals across manufacturing districts of England. Dripping and egg on toast was the most common single breakfast combination recorded, the dripping melting into the hot toast in seconds, the egg slid alongside, the yolk broken deliberately over the dripping toast, running gold across it. Everything eaten from one plate without ceremony. We spend £4 on a breakfast at a chain cafe that does not sustain us until 10. She made this for 4p, and he did not think about food again until noon. He never said it was his favorite breakfast. He ate it every morning for 30 years. That was the review. Breakfast 11. Cold meat sandwich Sunday's roast on Monday morning. Sliced cold between 2 pieces of bread with a scrape of mustard. Breakfast, packed lunch, and the reason a joint had to last the whole week. Cold sliced beef, lamb, or pork from the Sunday joint. 2 slices of bread, mustard, or a dab of horseradish. No cooking required, no preparation beyond slicing. Made in 2 minutes and eaten before the streets were light. Cost. The meat had already been bought. The sandwich was free. Carried to work in a cloth-wrapped parcel or eaten standing at the kitchen counter before the early shift. The Women's Institute Wartime Cooking Guides from 1943 described the planned use of the Sunday joint across the working week as essential household management, not a money-saving tip. An essential. The cold meat firm and slightly resistant. The mustard sharp against the richness of the fat. The bread absorbing the meat juices at the edges. We buy expensive deli meat in plastic packets at £4 for 6 thin slices. She sliced from the joint and made something better for nothing. The Sunday roast was never just Sunday dinner. It was the week's breakfasts already paid for. Here is the part that should make you angry. Between 1950 and 1970, breakfast cereal consumption in Britain increased by 600%. Not because cereal was nutritionally superior, because cereal companies spent more on advertising than any working-class breakfast food had ever generated in profit. Kellogg's alone spent £12 million on British advertising in 1968. The entire marketing budget of the British bacon, egg, and dripping industry combined could not compete. The health claims attached to cereal were not based on comparative nutrition studies. They were based on studies funded by the cereal companies themselves. A 1964 British Nutrition Foundation report, later found to have been partially funded by cereal manufacturers, declared processed grain cereals nutritionally equivalent to traditional cooked breakfasts. They were not. The working man's breakfast was not replaced because it was inferior. It was replaced because it could be packaged, branded, and sold at a premium. Dripping was free. Cornflakes cost money. The industry knew which one it preferred. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. And drop in the comments which breakfast you remember most before we get to number 1. Breakfast 10. Bloater paste on toast. The little glass jar with the distinctive label. Bloater paste on toast was the coastal working man's breakfast before the fishing industry collapsed and took the bloater with it. Whole smoked herring ground into a paste with butter and seasoning. Spread on hot toast for a breakfast that cost pennies and tasted of the sea. A jar cost about 3p in 1955 and spread across 4 to 6 slices. Bloaters, whole herrings cold smoked without gutting, had a stronger and gamier flavor than kippers. The paste was deeply savory and intensely concentrated in a way that fresh fish never quite achieved. Sold in coastal towns from Great Yarmouth to Lowestoft, where the bloater industry was entered. The East Anglian Oral History Archive describes bloater paste as the universal weekday breakfast of the Great Yarmouth fishing community through the first half of the 20th century. Dark brown and intensely fragrant from the jar, spread thickly on hot toast, the paste warming and softening slightly, the first bite hitting with concentrated smoke and salt. Bloater paste has essentially disappeared from British shops. A food that sustained an entire coastal industry for 500 years is now a curiosity at £6 a jar. Breakfast 9. Pottage before porridge, before gruel, before anything on this list, there was pottage, the breakfast that fed the British working poor for 600 years before anyone thought to improve on it. A thick broth of oats or barley simmered with whatever vegetables were available: onion, leek, cabbage, turnip, sometimes a bone for flavor, eaten hot from a shared pot before work began at dawn. Cost: almost nothing. The oats or barley were the cheapest grain available. The vegetables came from the garden. Victoria and Albert Museum Rural Life Records document pottage as the primary morning meal of the agricultural laboring class from 1300 through to 1800. 600 years as the foundation of working Britain's morning. Thick and pale grey-green from the vegetables, steam rising from the shared pot, smelling of grain and onion and whatever bone was in it. Ancient and filling, and completely honest about what it was. When the Industrial Revolution moved workers from fields to factories, pottage became porridge and gruel, simplified versions for households without gardens. We have reinvented it as grain bowls at £12 in health food cafes. The agricultural worker who ate it before ploughing 10 hours would not recognize what we have charged for it. Breakfast 8. Dripping cake, a slice of dripping cake with a mug of strong tea. Breakfast in Yorkshire pit villages through the 1930s and 40s. It sustained men through shifts that lasted until 2 in the afternoon. A plain fruit cake made with beef dripping instead of butter. Denser, richer, longer lasting. The dripping was free, saved from the week's cooking. A full cake cost 6pence to make and lasted the family through Thursday morning. Baked on Sunday, eaten cold through the working week in thick slices alongside strong tea, the fat providing sustained energy, the fruit providing natural sugar, the tea cutting through the richness, dense and slightly greasy in the fingers, the dried fruit scattered through the dark crumb, a breakfast that felt like something solid was being put into the stomach before something difficult was being asked of the body. The University of Sheffield Oral History Project documents dripping cake as the standard midweek breakfast in pit villages across the West, riding through the 1930s and 40s. We buy individual protein bars at £2 each that are largely sugar and marketing. She baked a dripping cake on Sunday for 6pence and it lasted until Thursday. Breakfast 7. Bread and treacle. Thick slices of bread spread with black treacle. The breakfast of the industrial north that tasted like something between sweetness and iron and left a mark on everything it touched. A tin of black treacle cost about 3pence in 1950 and lasted weeks. A loaf of bread cost about the same. Together they made the pre-shift breakfast of Lancashire and Yorkshire mill workers for generations. The treacle was not just sweetness. It provided iron, calcium, and B vitamins in significant quantities, nutritionally important in a way that its taste disguised completely. The Salford Local History Archive documents bread and treacle as a universal pre-shift breakfast among textile workers through the 1930s. Fast to prepare, cheap to produce, sustaining enough to last until the first break. The treacle spreading dark and slightly bitter, smelling of iron and molasses. On the tongue, the bitterness giving way to a deep earthen sweetness that refined sugar never produces. When jam became affordable in the post-war period, black treacle bread disappeared almost overnight. The swap felt like progress. The iron and B vitamins it provided were not replaced. The deficiency came quietly. Nobody connected it to the jam. Breakfast 6. Sowans before oats were rolled and packaged and sold in cardboard boxes. Scottish and Irish households fermented the inner husks of the oat grain into a soured, thin porridge that has not been made in most homes for 100 years. Oat husks soaked in water for several days until slightly fermented, then strained, and the liquid simmered until thickened. Eaten hot with salt or cold with buttermilk. Cost: the husks were the byproduct of grinding oats, material that was otherwise discarded. Sowans cost nothing. The fermentation produced lactic acid and B vitamins, a probiotic food made from waste material before the word probiotic existed. The statistical account of Scotland from 1791 documents sowans as the primary morning food of the agricultural labouring class across the Highlands. viand, thin and slightly sour on the tongue, the fermented tang like a mild yogurt, warming despite the sourness, ancient and strange to modern palates. Probiotic drinks sell for £2 each today. Sowons produce the same benefit from oat husks that were going to be thrown away regardless. The industrialization of oat processing eliminated the husks. Rolled oats replaced sowons because rolled oats could be packaged and branded and sold at a premium. Sowons could not, so sowons disappeared. Breakfast 5, smoked haddock with poached egg, the finnan haddie, pale yellow, gently smoked, simmered in milk until the flesh flaked at a touch. A poached egg broken over the top, the breakfast that built the fishing communities of the northeast Scottish coast. Finnan haddock, cold smoked from Findon in Aberdeenshire, simmered in a shallow pan of milk for 5 minutes. The egg slid in alongside for the last 2 minutes. Haddock was cheap in fishing communities, a few pence per piece in 1955. The Scottish Women's Rural Institute guides from 1949 listed finnan haddie as the definitive Scottish breakfast fish, suitable for every household with access to a fishmonger, rich in protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and iodine. One of the most nutritionally complete breakfasts available in Britain at minimal cost. The haddock pale yellow and fragrant from the smoke, the milk barely simmering around it, the egg white set, the yolk still soft, the broth poured over everything, thin and savory and smelling of the sea. Smoked haddock appears on hotel breakfast menus today as a luxury option at £9 a portion. In Aberdeenshire in 1955, it was Tuesday morning, nothing special, just breakfast. Breakfast 4, faggots and peas pudding, the Midlands breakfast that sounds like dinner because it was dinner, eaten before dawn, before the pits opened, before the foundries started, before most of the country was awake. Faggots, offal, and breadcrumbs wrapped in caul fat, served warm alongside peas pudding, the golden split pea puree that accompanied them across the Black Country in the north. Faggots cost 3p each in 1955. Peas pudding cost a penny a portion. The whole breakfast came to 4p and provided protein, iron, and fat in quantities that a foundry shift demanded. Peas pudding was sold from vats in shops throughout the Northeast and Midlands from early morning. You collected it on the way to work. The Wolverhampton City Archives document faggots and peas pudding as the standard pre-shift breakfast in foundry districts through the 1940s. Not an occasional treat, the standard. The faggot warm and dense, the caul fat having basted the offal into something rich and savory. The peas pudding golden and smooth alongside. The whole plate smelling of slow cooking and rendered fat. This was not food people ate because they had nothing better. In the Black Country, faggots and peas pudding before a foundry shift was a deliberate choice made by people who knew what their bodies needed. Breakfast 3, the full working breakfast, not the full English of the hotel buffet. Not the tourist version with mediocre sausages and tinned tomatoes, the real working breakfast, the one she made on Saturday when there was finally time to do it properly. Bacon fried in its own fat, eggs in the same fat, the white set and the yolk still running, black pudding until the casing split, fried bread in the same pan, tomatoes halved and fried alongside, mushrooms drinking up whatever fat remained, everything on one plate. The whole breakfast for 2 people in 1960 cost about 1 shilling. Every component cooked in the fat produced by the previous one. One pan, nothing wasted, everything flavored by everything else. This was Saturday, the one morning of the week when there was time, when the kitchen smelled of everything at once and nobody was in a hurry to be anywhere. The smell changed the whole house when the full breakfast was being made. Bacon first, then everything else arriving in order. The plate heavy when it came, everything still sizzling at the edges. The full English at a cafe costs £10 today and bears no resemblance to what is being served under the same name. The full working breakfast was not a meal, it was a Saturday. It was proof the week had been earned. In 2010, a meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reviewed 21 studies involving 347,000 participants. It found no significant association between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. The dietary fat hypothesis that drove the health warnings of the 1970s and 80s, the warnings that ended dripping, black pudding, and kippers as breakfast staples for a generation, was not supported by the evidence. The food that sustained 6 hours of physical labor, that built working-class Britain through its hardest decades, that was affordable on wages that left almost nothing to spare, has been quietly rehabilitated by the same science that spent 40 years condemning it. The working man's breakfast was right. The advice that replaced it was wrong. The generation that changed its diet based on that advice was the first to face an epidemic of obesity and metabolic disease that those breakfasts had never produced. The last 2 breakfasts on this list are the most important ones, not for what they contain, for what they represent. Breakfast 2, the miner's snap tin breakfast. He did not eat breakfast before the shift. He ate it underground, at the coalface, in the dark, from a tin. The snap tin contained whatever she had packed before 4 in the morning. Bread and dripping, cold bacon, a slice of pie, eaten 400 feet underground with hands that could not be properly cleaned. The tin opened in the dark, the smell of dripping and cold bacon rising, everything tasting better than it had any right to in those conditions. The National Coal Mining Museum Oral History Archive documents the snap tin in hundreds of testimonies from miners across Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire, and South Wales. We spent £8 on a breakfast wrap from a chain and eat it in a heated office. She packed that tin before 4 in the morning without being asked. He ate it in the dark without complaining. The gap between those two facts is where an entire working-class marriage lived. Breakfast 1, the breakfast she made without a recipe. There was no recipe. There was no name for it. Whatever was in the kitchen at 5 in the morning. A heel of bread, the last of the dripping, an egg if there was one. Something warm on the table before he left regardless. She did not cook from a recipe. She cooked from knowledge, from the understanding of what a body needed before physical labor and what the kitchen held that morning. The Mass Observation Project from 1943 documented over 300 accounts of working-class women describing their cooking methods simply as using what is there. Not one described following a recipe. The plate put down without ceremony, eaten quickly, the door closing behind him before the street was awake. The recipe died with her, not because it was secret, because it was never a recipe. It was knowledge, and knowledge does not survive when nobody passes it on. Try one this week. Salted porridge on Monday. Fried leftover potatoes on Tuesday, bovril on toast before work on Wednesday. I have eaten salted porridge every morning for 6 months. I am not hungry again until 1 o'clock. My grandfather would not have found that remarkable. Tell me in the comments what your grandfather ate before work. Not Sunday breakfast, the Monday morning one. He went underground on a scrape of dripping. The breakfast held. It always held. Now you know what they knew.